Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. I am your host and servant Steve Teed, asking you that very important question. What are you building your life on? What is it in your life that gives you guidance? What is it that helps you with those moral decisions? What is it that answers the questions of the big questions of life? Such things as, where do we come from? Where are we going? What happens when we die? How do I know what is there? That's what this show is all about. And today we're going to be digging right in. We're going to hit the news, and we're going to hit up a question at the second half that really is all about foundation. So let's cut the music, and I'll tell you where we're going to go into today's episode. On today's episode, so we're going to hit the news as we always do. And we're going to cover probably 3 news stories today. Some, like I said, you may be familiar with. Others, you may just be going, okay, I didn't really pay attention to it. And a lot of times I don't often cover like the major stories. I do mention them, but I cover some more little known ones, and for the reason is just to help us understand what is going on in the world. But when it comes down to it, it really is all about why. What is behind it? What's the purpose behind it? That's what we're really asking. And so when we're talking about foundation, as I do here, it's really what is behind it, what leads to this point. And so we're going to go visit kind of a few places all over the map. We're going to revisit Roe Vs Wade a little bit, not in its entirety, but the fallout from it. And probably one of those fallouts that you may not even really pay attention to. But it's one that is very fascinating because there's things that are taking place that I just want to take a moment and look at. So we're going to visit Roe Vs Wade. Then we're going to go visit Justin Peterson just for a little bit. And the reason for that is, Jordan Peterson, not Justin Peterson. I was confused that with another person. Jordan Peterson, because he got a ban from Twitter. But it's a ban that they're willing to lift if he apologizes. So the question is, what was so bad that he got banned for, that he has to apologize for? And just, he refuses to apologize for it. So I just want to visit that for a little bit. And then we're going to go visit Spiderman. I admit, I'm a bit of a Spiderman fan. I asked one of my sons yesterday to watch a movie. He said, what do you want to watch? He said, Spiderman. And I recently just purchased the 3 Spiderman movies there, Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. Truthfully, I only really wanted No Way Home. I've seen the other 2. But I figure I'll buy all 3 of them anyway, and I'm just too impatient at this point to wait until, I think July it's going to be on Prime here in Canada. I'm just a little too impatient for that, and I may want to watch it more than not when it goes off Prime. So we're going to visit Spider-Man for a very important reason, and we're going to see what that is. Why is it? And there's something else going on, because if you're not aware of Disney bought Marvel, if you hadn't figured that one out, for billions of dollars, and so there's something with Disney and with Spider-Man, and I'll leave it at that for now. You may be able to guess where that is going. So that's where we're going to head off in today's episode, and then after the break we're going to cover something a little bit different, but it's all on the foundation. So if we're going to hit the foundation, we're going to hit the news story. The first thing we got to do is we got to bring up our news music, and like I said, people are like, oh, why do I announce it? Because I like to announce it. It's my show. I can do that. So news music. Here we go, as it comes on. All right, our first story is a fallout from Roe v. Wade. Fallout from Roe v. Wade. There's been lots of fallout from Roe v. Wade, backlashes. Some of it has been just kind of, pandering, fear-mongering, that kind of thing, saying Roe v. Wade's going to upturn the entire United States Constitution, and that's going to affect into Canada, that kind of thing. Then they're talking about, and I saw one saying this is going to put abortions back in back alleys and raise the death rate, that kind of thing, and others are like it's going to overturn all the last laws that have been put in place. But there is one here that is kind of fascinating coming out, and it's I got it from this one is from Blaze TV. Blaze TV. Now I don't use them very often, but look what it says: up 900%. Roe's reversal sends young men rushing to get vasectomies. All right, so that's going to be our first story here. That a fallout from Roe v. Wade is that men are suddenly going out and getting vasectomies. It's kind of a fascinating story. One of the other things I looked at, and I thought about covering this a little bit, but I wasn't going to cover it, was a call on TikTok, I think it was, for a sex strike for women. Women saying until men get on board and put abortion on demand back, that we should go on a sex strike, is what they were saying. So no more sex. And then you got this side. And because of that, it's like a up 900% reversal, sending young men rushing to get vasectomies. Let's go through the story a bit first here. Then I'll talk about it a little bit. And then you got the sign there that the lady's holding. It's like a U.S. recruitment poster. I want you to get a vasectomy. I'd rather than go like Smokey the Bear. Only you can get vasectomies, or only you can prevent unwanted pregnancies. Yeah, because I think that fits better, rather than the army recruitment here. But okay, let's get into it. Okay. Now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, the idea of not being able to send their lady friends off to the local abortion clinic seems to have prompted young men to take an interest in a permanent form of contraception. According to the Washington Post, doctors across the country are seeing a huge spike in requests for vasectomies in response to the Supreme Court's ruling 1 week ago, and men under the age of 30 feature prominently among those now seeking the procedure. A Florida urologist told the outlet that he's seen vasectomies requests jump from 4 or 5 a day to 12 to 18 per day, and that young men who do not have children are seeking vasectomies in greater numbers than before. In Los Angeles, doctors have reported a 300 to 400% increase in vasectomy consultations. A Missouri-based urologist said, "We're up 900% in people looking at getting a vasectomy." The Cleveland Clinic in Ohio said it usually gets 3 to 4 requests a day, but the number has jumped to 90 from Friday to Wednesday. The Austin Urology Institute in Texas told a local NBC affiliate, "We've had over 400 phone calls to our office just this past Friday, with 70 occurring over just 1 hour period after Roe v. Wade passed. We had a record number of bookings for requests for vasectomies." Now, for those who are not familiar with what a vasectomy is, I'm guessing you can probably figure this one out. Vasectomy, the way the male anatomy works is the sperm is collected in the testes. That's where it's kind of formed, that kind of thing. The seminal fluid is more likely, it's back like the prostate area is where it is. And what a vasectomy does is it goes in and it cuts the vas deferens. So in other words, it does not allow the sperm that is produced in the testes to connect with the seminal fluid of the prostate, and in other words, doesn't allow it to come out and fertilize any eggs during the act of sexual intercourse. As a procedure, let me tell you, I'll say it's uncomfortable, but it's not too bad. You're talking to a guy who's actually had it done twice. First one, I won't say it didn't take, but my body was able to heal it a little bit, and for the second time, yeah, definitely took that kind of thing. And but it's a form of contraception. It really is. But I remember in both times I had to go in for a consultation ahead of time. One at one hospital, one at the other, because I moved cities in that time frame. And the one thing that they ask ahead of time is, understand this: you're done having children, right? You were done. At the original time, I had 2, and that's all we kind of wanted. So yes, we are done. That's all we want. So I had the procedure done. And let me know. I rested the rest of that day. But the next day I was back to teaching, that kind of thing. I wore loose pants, and I was good to go. Now the second time we ended up with another child. That's how we fully discovered that my body had healed the vasectomy. After the second one, I was laid up for a little bit longer because with scar tissue from the first one, it was a little rougher procedure. We'll put it that way. And the freezing didn't take all the way. A little more painful. But again, for that consultation, it's like, you're done having children. In other words, when it comes to vasectomy, despite what they want to push, they were saying, it's like, yes, there is a procedure that kind of reverses it, but it's not 100%. In fact, it's only about 25%. So this is a permanent thing that the men were going through. The men kind of jumped in. They said a significant increase in this. But let's continue on here. A urologist in North Miami said that the demand for vasectomy since last Friday has been overwhelming. And an Iowa-based urologist reported a 200 to 250% increase in traffic to his website offering information on vasectomies. The rush to get a vasectomy is just one of the many extreme reactions we've seen since Roe Vs Wade was overturned. While many on the left are reacting with outrage, confusion, and fear, pro-life conservatives are finally celebrating a long-awaited win. Blaze TV host Stu Bergerier, whatever his name is, sorry Stu, said overturning Roe v. Wade was actually the easy part. On a recent episode of Stu Does America, Stu explained that the long road ahead for the pro-life movement and talked about what must be accomplished to rid the planet of the evil that is abortion forever. Author Ryan T. Anderson also stopped by to explain the history of abortion and how it has torn society apart in multiple ways, and says then you can watch the full episode. So that's just the full article, but the article is really just about the increase in vasectomies. Now, what I really like is that subtitle to the article: Extreme Measures or Rightful Responsibility. Break it down here, let's ask a question. What is the entire argument of the right to life movement? What is the entire argument? Why is it that the right to life people wanted abortion banned? Why do they want abortion made illegal? Why do they want it struck down? Why do they want it completely obliterated? So answer that question. Why? Because at its core, the right to life movement believes and holds that all life is valuable and that life begins at conception. So when a woman becomes pregnant because of sexual activity, and a sperm meets the egg and fertilizes it, that becomes a living creature. It becomes one that is absolute and therefore has a right to life. That's the statement. As much as people want to get around abortion and that kind of thing, like it or not, abortion at its greatest success, if an abortion is successful, it ends in a life. It ends a life. That's really what it does. It ends a life of a fetus, which just literally means little person. That's all fetus actually means. So calling it a fetus does not change the definition of that's person. And that's what it is. So the right to life, all it wants to do is basically say, hey, that's a real person. They should have a chance to live. That's all it is. And so you should avoid kind of activities. You should avoid unwanted pregnancies. And as much as people like to put the argument forth that abortion is, they go to the extremes, like what about incest and rape? What about if the mother's life is in danger? That kind of thing. And those become very tough questions, no doubt about it. Those are very tough questions. Really what it comes down to is convenience. Like 99.9% of abortions, somewhere around that area, it might be like 99.7% of abortions, whether people want to admit it or not, are convenience. They don't want to be inconvenienced. Be it a woman saying, I don't want my body to change, I've got a figure to uphold, saying it's going to be a financial burden on me, it's going to change the way I live and I don't want to give up my lifestyle. That's male or female, it doesn't really matter. So they say we don't want it. So we want to give it up. And the right to life, it's one of these things. The right to life, you want to call it a Christian organization or whatnot. I've never heard a right to life organization say we want to ban sex. Now, I obviously teach and I hold that sex should be done within the confines of marriage. I've got a whole episode on this. What is sex? You can look that up. It's a previous episode. And I talk about that and why is sex important and what is sex for. Sex is for pleasure and sex is for for reproduction. And reproduction, the birth of a child, is a part of the blessing of sex, not an unwanted side effect like some want to put out, but a blessing of it. Now, if you're going to be one of those ones to say, well, we don't think that sex should be confined to marriage. Sex is pleasurable, so therefore we want to engage in it. I'm going to go with that argument just for a second. And you argue what we don't want is we don't want the unwanted pregnancy, and abortion helps us correct that. That's literally the argument. So abortion will help us correct that, so we don't have a child born that we don't want. Then this argument of vasectomies is actually, I would say, go ahead, get a vasectomy. Now, just understand the full intended consequences of that. That after a vasectomy, even if you go through the reversal procedure, you've only got, I think it's about a 25% chance that the reversal will work. So you're not just giving up being able to have children for a short period of time. You're potentially giving up children for life. Now, if you understand that, go ahead, get a vasectomy. Go ahead. The same is this argument for, it's like the call on TikTok that I said, it's like, hey, we're going to go on a sex strike. Well, go ahead. Do you know what the right to life side is saying? Good. That's what we want. That's your choice. Do it. Do you know what it's going to stop? It's going to stop unwanted pregnancies. So in other words, it's almost like fighting against saying, well, we're going to protest Roe v. Wade by having less sex and get vasectomies. They're going, go ahead. Go ahead. Do it. It's going to stop the unwanted pregnancies. If there's not unwanted pregnancies, there won't be a need for abortion. It's a funny thing, isn't it? That it really comes down to the fact that saying, hey, we're gonna do this in protest, and this is going, great, go ahead. It's like, what do you think is going to happen? Now, again, when I talked about Roe v. Wade, getting abortion removed and really severely restricting it is not the end of the picture. You've got to do things. You've got to have resources in place. You've got to have, like I said, adoption things in place. You've got to have all these other resources in place. That's step one, and there's a long job to go. But it was an interesting article that vasectomies jump, but in one place 900%, but they're seeing it like 200, 300, 400% requests and information on it. And what is it? It's taking responsibility. Taking responsibility. That's all it comes down to. Contraceptives, condoms, other things. Contraceptives, that's really what it comes down to. If you're going to engage in an activity that is by nature designed to produce other humans, and you don't want those humans to come into being, well, you've got two options. One, don't engage in the activity. Don't do it. Or two, because of our scientific advancement, things like that, use contraceptive. Use contraceptive. You say, why would I push that? Obviously, if I teach that sex is for marriage, why would I even teach something like that? Because even though I think it's wrong to engage in sexual activity outside of marriage, I think it's a greater wickedness, a greater evil, that a life be terminated for the sake of convenience, just because you did something else. It's compounding the wicked and the evilness. So it's just a small article there. So we're gonna go on to a second story. I'm not gonna spend a long time on this one, but I do want to cover it as well. So we can do that. Let's bring it up here. All right, there we are. Our second kind of story. I'm gonna turn over to the Daily Wire here. Jordan Peterson. Here's what he says: "I'd rather die than delete truthful tweet for cancel creeps." I'm going to admit that's probably not how I would word something. It isn't. I probably wouldn't word it this way, but hey, he's wording it that way. It's his words. I call them cancel creeps and things like that. But what was the tweet? What was the tweet? Well, let's just look at the tweet here for a second. It says, "A few days ago, I penned an irritated tweet in response to one of the latest happenings on the increasingly heated culture war front, in response to the decision of an actor named Ellen Elliott Page." Now, if you're not familiar who Elliott Page is a male who went under surgery to transgender into a female and now calls themselves Ellen. Okay? So that's what he's responding to. So these are Jordan Peterson's words. He says, "I am employing this awkward and impossible multiple naming style because it is now apparently mandatory, and probably doing it wrong. Nonetheless, as you're doing it wrong is the whole point of what has been made mandatory, but also to make a point." He says, "I have essentially been banned from Twitter as a consequence. I say banned, although technically I've been suspended. But the suspension will not be lifted unless I delete the hateful tweet in question." And he says, "I would rather die than do that. And hopefully it will not come to that, though I don't prefer that language, who the heck knows. in this increasingly strange days. So, Jordan Peterson made a tweet. What was the tweet? That is a good question. What was the aforementioned tweet that is so hateful, that is so wicked that it got him suspended? What was it? Well, let's pull it up, shall we? It even gives us here in the article here. So what was it that I said that caused such a fuss? And even more importantly in complexity, what exactly was it that I said that resulted in the ban or suspension? Here's the tweet in question. He says this: remember when pride was a sin and Ellen Page just had her breast removed as a criminal physician by a criminal physician? Okay, so I had it backwards. Obviously, I'm not up on all Hollywoods. Ellen Page is a female who transgendered, had a double mastectomy, and is transitioned into a guy. There it is. Okay. Into what they think a guy is. I'll say it that way. And so his tweet was, remember when pride was a sin and Ellen Page just had her breast removed by a criminal physician? And then the response from Twitter is what you would expect. Response to violating our rules against hateful conduct. You may not promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on a basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. By clicking delete, you acknowledge that your tweet violated the Twitter rules. And this is if you think we've made a mistake, submit an appeal to us. Please note that should you do so, your account will remain locked while we review the appeal. So in other words, since he's never going to remove it, his account is essentially banned. So here's the question. Is it a hateful tweet? Is it hateful? Is it promoting violence against? Is it threatening? That kind of thing. The only thing that it may classify as, I'm going to guess, that would be harassing. But at the same time, I'm going to ask if it's not directly targeted, if it's not hashtagged to Ellen Page. There's a question, but the real question is this: is the truth hateful? Is truth hateful? That's the question. There's a fundamental question under that you also have to answer, and it's actually one that you can find asked by Pontius Pilate in the Bible. He says, "What is truth?" And in Pilate's situation, he was faced with a mob outside telling him that this is true, trying to tell them about who Jesus is, that kind of thing. And then Pilate comes in and he talks to Jesus, and Jesus says something else, and Pilate's so frustrated, he says, well, what is truth? He's got Jesus inside saying one thing, he's got a mob outside saying something else. And so it's the question, what is truth? I think we've got to ask that same question. In today's society, what do we have? Well, we've got a mob outside, a cancel culture, a group saying, well, this is what truth is. You've got to accept it. And then you got, in this case, Justin Peters, who's saying, no, this is the truth. So you got the mob outside saying, Elliot Page is a full male. You got a person inside, Justin Peters, saying Ellen Page is a female who just mutilated their body, basically, is what he's saying. And then you ask the question, what is truth? Which one is true? And therefore, once you decide what is true, is it hateful to declare truth? So let's take that example. And this is why the regulations of Twitter don't even really make any sense. This is why our idea of free speech doesn't even work. Let's go back just for a second and look at those things. It violates our rules against hateful conduct, okay? What is hateful conduct? Promoting violence against, threatening, or harassing, okay? That's what they're doing. Based on what? Race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity. Would declare, so they're going to declare that Jordan Peterson's tweet violates the hateful conduct based on gender and gender identity. I'm going to guess more gender identity because it's not directly against a woman, so gender identity, okay? So, but he's saying that this is true, that Ellen Page is a woman who cut her breasts off. That's what he's saying, okay? On the other side, though, it's going to be the religious who say that, hey, they're created in God's image, and Ellen Page was created in the image of God, and Ellen Page was born a woman, and therefore she's a woman. The other side would tweet and say, no, you are wrong. You've got no right to say this. You're being hateful. So what are they doing? Well, they're promoting violence against, threatening, and harassing, because this is probably what it's falling under. What's the next one after that was after gender identity? Religious affiliation. This is why it can't work. This is why it's going to end up going one way or the other. It really is. It's going to fall one way or the other. This idea of free speech isn't going to work in a society that in essence can't keep everybody happy. Even Twitter, by its own standards, is going to go one way or the other. You're going to have to lean one way or the other. Let me give you an example of this. Trinity Western University out in Western Canada was a Christian law school. And in their code of conduct for their school, they had on their assignment saying that that sex is to be kept in the confines of marriage, the covenant of marriage between a man and a woman. That's what it was. So their code of conduct said sex is to be kept in the covenant of marriage between a man and a woman. Now, that limits it very greatly. Okay? Now, what ended up happening is Trinity Western, they got into a fight with various provinces saying we're not going to accept this, like Ontario, Quebec, and one other. And they said, well, we're just not going to accept your accreditation then. You can believe it or not, we're just not going to accept your accreditation. So your law degree will become pointless in our provinces because we're just not going to accept it. So we're never going to allow them to be recognized. So it went to the Supreme Court of Canada. The judge who ruled in the case admitted this, said, no matter what I do in this case, I'm going to trample somebody's freedoms. That's what he said. Now, you say, well, why is it that those provinces were against it? Well, because it said that marriage between a man and a woman, so you're being discriminatory against homosexuals. And you're shutting down homosexuals, so therefore we're not going to recognize it. And Trinity's like, no, we're not. They said, no, we weren't. It also says that sex between a man and a woman outside the confines of marriage is wrong. So it went to the Supreme Court, and Trinity's saying, you can't do this, and they're saying, yes, we can. And as I said, the judge ruled that Ontario, Quebec, and the other province, the name just escapes me now, which province it was, he says they're in the right to do this. But he admitted that either way, I'm going to trample somebody's rights. So what is he doing? He said, I'm really pushed between homosexual rights, the freedom to express yourself however you want in sexuality versus the freedom of religion. He says that's really what this comes against. And this is exactly what you're seeing basically there on Twitter. You're going to go one way or the other. And that's a battle that's going to continue to go on. It is. And I think it's one we have to be aware of. All right, I want to get to the third story. A little bit shorter here, but here we go. All right, our third story is about Spider-Man. Spider-Man, like I said, I'm a Spider-Man fan. I remember watching the original Spider-Man and knowing the song Spider-Man. My favorite one, although as much as I like that early one, it's absolutely ridiculous and over the top. If you're not familiar with that, just go look up the original Spider-Man cartoon. I like the 1990s version of Spider-Man, which had crossovers with Doctor Strange, with the X-Men, with Punisher, with Blade, with all of them basically, and even like Captain America and all that, and the Fantastic Four. I really like that one. So I'm a Spider-Man fan, but lately Spider-Man has opened itself up to the idea of multiverse kind of thing. What do you have? Welcome to the Spider-Verse. I was almost confusing it there with the new Doctor Strange movie, which I haven't seen yet. Welcome to the Spider-Verse, which introduced a whole bunch of different Spider-Men. Then you've got Spider-Man No Way Home, which, again, I haven't watched yet. I own it now. I just haven't watched it yet. Which brings in other Spider-Mans. I know it makes the other two Spider-Mans movies, brings them in as well. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield as well, which I also enjoyed their movies. Spider-Man 3, not so much, and I think The Amazing Spider-Man 2 fell into that same trap, but yeah, it's just kind of the way it is. And so they're going to introduce a new Spider-Man now. So what is this new Spider-Man? Well, let me give you this. It's Disney. Think about that for a second. Think about Disney for a second. Spider-Man, Disney. What has Disney been doing the last while? What was the big hubbub over Lightyear? Well, let's go and take a look. Marvel to unveil gay Spider-Man in Disney-owned company's latest LGBTQ nod. That's right. Spider-Man's going gay. Welcome to the multi-Gayder-verse, because they're going to bring in one that's gay. Let's just go through the article here very quickly. Spider-Man is coming out of the closet as a laced-garbed, effeminate crime fighter in Marvel Comics' latest genfluation to the LGBTQ community. Okay, that was a hard sentence to read. Let's try that again. Spider-Man is coming out of the closet as a lace-garbed, effeminate crime fighter in Marvel's Comics' latest genuflection to the LGBT community. The Disney-owned company is about to introduce a gay version of the iconic webmaster, who will appear in the upcoming comic book issue Edge of the Spider-Verse. See what I mean? It's just basically going to make one gay. The news was revealed on Twitter by Marvel writer Steve Fox. Surprise! I had the huge gay honor of helping to co-create Web Weaver, who will make his debut in Edge of the Spider-Verse #5 this September, Fox tweeted. Now, I don't read comics that often, but I'm sorry. When I look at that, I don't even... What is with the costumes lately? I just recently watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and when Falcon, spoiler alert here, but really shouldn't be no surprise if you're familiar with it, Falcon becomes kind of the new Captain America. And he gives his speech kind of in the last episode there. It's the outfit that ruined it for me. Look, it doesn't look good. Can't they just design things anymore? So that's kind of the Spider-Man there. So in a separate tweet, Fox assured writers that gay Spider-Man won't be a proxy for all gays. Okay, I'm not even sure what that really means, but he says, something I realized immediately when conceiving Web Weaver is that he can't and shouldn't represent all gay men, Fox wrote. No singular character can. His fearlessly femme identity is central to who he is, but it's not the story. Actually, I almost probably guarantee it is. It probably is. And now I'm never going to read it because, as I said, I don't spend money on comic books and I don't read comic books that often. Some people do. Good for you. Go ahead. It says, which you can experience for yourself in September. I really hope not, and I hope they never bring it into video, because I never want to see it. It's bad enough things I see. Fans on Twitter were not all on board for a same-sex Spidey. Dude, why do you have to ruin Spider-Man? Tweeted Eduardo Lanza. Stan Lee said not to make him gay. You're doing something out of someone else's mind. Changing a few things and calling it an original character. Don't you brainstorm before these kinds of things? Another one, a gay Spider-Man, tweeted Misty Morgan. The large majority of Americans do not support this lifestyle and won't support the body of work you are presenting. And so here, this is again, he quotes Eric July, says the next unnecessary tokenized Spider-Man character to be announced for the upcoming unnecessary Edge of Spider-Verse is the first gay Spider-Man known as Web Weaver. Creator Steve Fox calls it a huge gay honor. Check out the full clip now live on YouTube, and you can check it there. But you wonder, why is this happening? This can't be beneficial for Disney to cater to this. In fact, when you look at, let's go the last paragraph here. Parent company Disney, which bought Marvel in 2009 for $4 billion, recently injected the gay agenda into its latest Toy Story film, portraying a same-sex kiss between two animated female characters. The scene has caused the film to be banned in 14 countries and may have contributed to its dismal box office performance in the U.S. Now, if you're not familiar with the thing behind Lightyear, Disney originally included a same-sex female kiss in Lightyear. It was removed. It was put onto the cutting room floor as unnecessary, but then with what was going on with Florida and DeSantis, they decided to put it back in as a statement, which then got it banned in 14 countries, and China has refused, which is a major market, refused to show the film unless they cut the scene again, and it ended up bombing at the box office. So why is it that they're continuing to push it? That's the question. Why is it that Disney is continuing to push these things? Because they're not making money on it. Now, they made a huge investment and profit in Marvel, But why are they continuing to push the LGBTQ, which is continuing to lose them money? The shares are down. Tourism is down. Why? Why is it? Well, let's work with something here. Disney has very deep pockets. And I mean very deep. And if they can play a very long game on this, and what's the long game? Continue to put it in front of you until you just accept it. That's what it is. Continue to put it in front of you until you just accept it. Think about it. This is why language has changed. And I don't mean languages in our culture. I mean language on TV. Where if you watch shows that language that used to be beeped out is no longer bleeped out. Why? Because it's become so commonplace. It's appearing everywhere. It appears in games, appears in movies, appears in television shows. Even now when you watch something that's PG, there's swear words in it. And they're like, so what? It's like, no, you just become so customized to it. What is Disney doing? Disney's just playing the long game. This is why they put it in absolutely everything. This is why it's everywhere in their products. Because they're trying to push it. That's really what it is. That's what they're going for. But they're underestimating something. And it was Michael Knowles who said this, and I agree with him. They're misunderstanding tolerance and acceptance. They're pushing past the tolerance. Now, what is a tolerance? Define tolerance here for a second. Tolerance is actually an engineering term, and it means how far something can bend before it breaks. That's really what it is. How far something can bend before it breaks. Disney is continuing trying to push these things and not realizing that the tolerance for a lot of people has already gone past its breaking point. And now they're snapping back. That's what's happening. But they're continuing to do it. Why? Because they're continuing to try to push this until the tolerance level of people becomes so accepting that they just give in and say whatever. This is why it's being pushed everywhere. This is why you see it pushed in our society. This is why it's being pushed in schools and in laws. It's being pushed even within in the church realm. Why? This is critical theory. You want to change the culture Marxism. You change the robes. You change the judges, you change the academics, and you change the clergy. You get those three, you can start to change the culture. And that's what they're pushing for. That's what they're pushing for. And so this latest Spiderman is going to be in a version of a web weaver, a gay, effeminate Spiderman. That's what it's coming down to. So as much as they're like, hey, we don't stop stereotyping gays, they're turning around and making a stereotypical gay Spiderman, making them super effeminate. From the way they look, from the way they stand, from the clothing, the whole bit. Why? It's because in the end, it's you will accept this. You'll just give in. They're basically playing a long game trying to wear you down. And the only way that it can actually stop is if the culture itself, if society itself says, no, we're just going to cut you off. We're going to shut this down. And don't bring it up. All right, so we're going to take a break now. We're going to come back after the break. And come on back to after the break, and we're gonna be going on, and we're gonna be looking at foundation. Is definitely what we're looking at, the foundation, and we're gonna be challenging it. And I'll give you the question that we're gonna ask right after the break. We're gonna cover: are you a good person? Are you a good person? Why don't you think about that as we go into the break, and I'll see you on back after the break as we ask that question: are you a good person? Tell me, do you feel stuck in life and you're just not sure where to go? You're just at that moment? Maybe you should try a life coach. I have with me Miss Sheena from Natural Talk Life Coaching. We're just going to ask a little bit about life coaching. So Sheena, tell me first off, what is a life coach?
Hi, Steve. Yes, life coach is basically as simplistic as partnering with my client through a creative, natural, thought-provoking process that allows the client to maximize their professional and personal potential. That's kind of as simplistic in a nutshell of what life coaching actually is.
Okay. So it makes it a little different because you don't just give advice, you empower the person to help them get to where they want to be.
Absolutely, that's correct. Is no advice involved. It is basically coming alongside the client to kind of guiding the client, aiding the client, helping the client figure out their next steps about what's kind of stopping them or hindering them from realizing or thinking through their actual potential.
Okay. So tell me, who would use one? Who would seek out a life coach?
Hmm. I would say anyone, really. Even the most prominent people, as a matter of fact, coaches actually have life coaches as well. So, life coaching can be a vital asset to anyone, any common man. It doesn't matter who you are, what background you come from, the lifestyle that you're living, your profession. Everyone can use some sort of coaching now and then. So, it's kind of a bit of both. It's very much an asset.
Okay. Why would they seek out a life coach?
A lot of times, we come to certain places in our life where we feel like a little bit stuck or just struggling through some things. It could be something as simplistic as someone who realizes that they need a little bit more balance in their life, someone who is struggling between two types of decisions that they have to make. So it's kind of the regular struggles of any common person. It doesn't have to be anything that's tremendously big. It could be something as simple as they just need a little bit of help with something.
Okay. So it almost seems like what sets it apart. It's a short. A lot of times, it seems like a short-term thing. In other words, I'm stuck just for a little bit, so I can pick up maybe like 2, 3 sessions to help me move forward.
Hmm.
So rather than a long-term commitment with an organization or something, would that be correct?
That would be absolutely correct. Coaching can be anywhere between if someone just needs maybe 1 to 3 sessions to someone who is kind of would like to commit to it for a matter of a month to 3 months. So the term itself can be short term or it can be long term, depending on the needs of the client. And the sessions can go anywhere from 30 minutes to as long as 45 minutes. I've actually had a client who, their very first session, we ended up being an hour, which is okay. And in that, sometimes in those sessions, a solution is not really formulated at that moment, and that's okay too.
Okay.
So, like I said, it all depends on the time frame and needs of the client.
All right. You mentioned a session. Can you just walk me briefly, like through a basic session?
Absolutely. So I'm just going to use an example. I just had a session with someone who just needed something as simple as balance in their life. So it is very important as a coach to kind of take in consideration that need that the client is trying to convey. And so listening is an important component of coaching. So in that sense, we come together and I always tell my client, you have the choice of either it being visual or it can just be through audio. Totally the comfort of the client is the most important part of the session. And we walk through it by, I ask the client, first and foremost, what is it that they're looking to achieve by the end of the session? What is the things that they're looking to be most vital that they're trying to find a solution for? And then we go from there. And then I just ask certain thought provoking questions of what makes it such a priority for you at this time? What are you looking to change? Is there something in particular that's stopping you from achieving it? And so on and so forth. And through those questions, it stirs up very, very much different thoughts and ideas. And then as it comes to a close through the session, we kind of go through some action steps that will help the client to kind of move forward. And like I said, it could be action steps or it can just be one action step, something that's very feasible and that the client is accountable in doing. And so we make sure by ending the conversation that it is feasible for the client to do. And we have what's called SMART goals. Is it specific? Is it measurable, achievable, realistic? Is it right? And is it timed? So once that happens, then we move forward and we kind of have a check-in with the client as well. If we want to do another session where we can come back and see if that step was, formable and feasible for the client to achieve. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So are these sessions always in person? Or are they virtual or a combination of both? How would they work?
Absolutely. So these sessions can be anywhere from virtual, they can be anywhere from just a phone call, or it can be in person. During COVID, it made it very hard to do a lot of in-person sessions. So virtual was the most popular one that I did. And then I did a lot of phone conversations as well. So it's totally the comfort of the client.
Well, I think we got a bit of information here. How would they contact you if they want more information? How could they contact you?
So very much so. I do have a website now. It's called Natural Talk Life Coach at outlook.com. That would be the very most one that they can use to contact me. And I will respond most definitely right away in a timely manner for sure. So that would be the best way to contact me.
Oh, so contact you by email at
Yes.
naturaltalklifecoach at outlook.com.
Yes, that's
All right,
correct.
we'll definitely put that on there for people who would like to to see that. They can write it down. I thank you just for giving us a shout here, and we'll maybe visit back in and get some more details later. But that's a reminder. It's for anybody who just seems stuck for a moment, who who needs someone to come alongside, help them, empower, and figure out where they're going to go. And that's a broad variety. It's really wide open. So if you'd like more information, you can contact Machina there for Natural Talk Life Coaching. You contact her at Natural Talk Life Coach at outlook.com. All one word, Natural Talk Life Coach at outlook.com. Thank you for joining me, Machina. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you for having me very much, Stephen. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. It's good to be back with you again. The reason I continue to put that one commercial in is one I do like to publicize a little bit. And if you're in need of help and stuck in a direction, you can write to the email in the commercial, and she will help work you through it. It empowers you to make the decisions that you need to get ahead of your set goals. All right, as I said before the break, we're going to be covering a question that's going to be asked. And I asked you this question: are you a good person? Are you a good person? That's an interesting question. Now, to start to deal with this, I want to turn over to a New York Times article. A New York Times article. I don't really have the date on it, but yeah, there it is. Okay, March 4, 2020. I got the date. I just see it there. A New York Times article from 2020, and it's asking the question: are you a good person? Are you a good person? Now, I said this is all about the foundation. This is all about what makes you you. This is all about of how do you answer that question. So your first instinct is either going to be, yes, I'm a good person, no, I'm not a good person, or I'm not sure. And the answer to that question is going to be found in one very fact. And they actually ask the question. Here's the question they ask in the subtitle: what makes somebody a good person? Do you strive to be one? But it's that first part. What makes somebody a good person? That's the question. What makes you a good person? Do you ever stop and think about that? So, well, this is a good fella. That's a good fella. But are they good? What makes them good? How do we know good? You see, that's really a foundational question. A couple of years ago, I asked the youth in a survey at the start of the year as I was planning the lesson plan, do you think the world is getting better or the world is getting worse? And one of the honest responses from one of the youth, I got some, the world is getting worse. One or two said better. But one of the honest ones was, that depends on your perspective. That's true, isn't it? Is that true? That it's getting better based on my perspective? Or in other words, is the world heading in a direction which aligns with the values that I already have, or is it moving against it, is kind of what they're asking. So the question is, are you a good person? And the honest question you have to ask is, based on what? Based on what? That's the question. Because you say, well, there's good, there's evil, or is there not? Richard Dawkins says there isn't. Richard Dawkins says there's neither good nor evil, there's just pitiless indifference. That means nothing is right, nothing is wrong. And then you take a look at all these things that go around us, and you want to say, well, that's wrong, this is wicked, they're evil. And yet, what are you basing it on? What are you making the decision on? But let's go back to that article. And they try to answer it, okay? In How to Be Good, Simran Senthi sought out a therapist, a scholar, a monk, a CEO, and others to learn about bringing our best to everything we do every day. She begins by exploring the meaning of goodness. And that's a good place to start. If we're going to define, am I a good person? Then we have to define it. So, let's see what they wrote. Rakana Kemtekar, a professor of philosophy at Cornell University, explained goodness by the way of ancient Greek philosophy. So it's using philosophy. For Plato, goodness is the same as happiness. Now, are you familiar with that worldview? That is hedonism. That's hedonism. If it brings me joy, it brings me pleasure, therefore it is good. That's the idea. So continuing in the quote from the Greek philosophy, for Plato, goodness is the same as happiness. We desire appetitely because of our bodies. We desire emotionally because of our sense of self in contact with other human beings. We also have rational desires to understand how to do what's best. Our goodness requires all of these capacities to be developed and then expressed. Now, I'm going to ask a question again. This is an important question. This is what it means to develop a foundation. This is what this is all about. He says, we desire mostly because we have a sense of self in contact with other human beings, and also we have rational desires to understand how to do what's best. Well, the question is, how do you define best? What's best? You're just kind of saying it there. And they say this is a lifelong process, something that is never perfectly realized, but should always be struggled for. Goodness is impermanent and organic, means it changes all the time. Well, if it changes all the time, then how can I ever achieve it? How can I ever be classified as good? It's organic, meaning it can progress as well as regress. So in other words, you can't be good. So let's continue on. Because many of us have a complicated relationship with what it means to be good, it can help reframe the subject and widen it. So we're going to change the definition. So here's what it says. Some people flinch when they ponder whether or not they or others are good because we use words good and goodness have long been associated with obedience. The author and former Dear Sugars podcast host Cheryl Strayard shared in response to a query from the Times. She says, I reject that definition. Goodness is expressed through loving kindness, generosity of spirit and deed, and the thoughtful consideration of others. Well, let's take that. You may agree with that. Goodness is expressed through loving kindness, generosity of spirit and deed, and the thoughtful consideration of others. Let me ask you a question. How do you know those are good things? Why is generosity classified as good? You go, well, I know it is, but how? How? You're just saying it is. What is the definition of it? Generosity is good, but how do you know that? Consideration of others. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that that's a good thing? Maybe considering the group I'm in is actually a bad thing. Maybe if I'm considerate of the group I'm in, I'm going to go against the evolutionary method, which means I look after myself. What if looking after the thoughtful consideration of others takes away from my happiness? Well, according to Plato, that would be bad because goodness is equated to my happiness. So how do we know this? You see the problem? And it says it can be as simple as offering to let someone ahead of you in line. Well, what if I let them ahead of me in line then causes them to run into a problem? What if being ahead of me in line causes them to miss out on the prize that the store would have had, and I get it because I let them ahead? Is that therefore good, or is it classified as greedy? And so it can be as complicated as making year-long sacrifices of your freedom, and because someone you love needs your help. But again, doesn't that go against Plato's definition that goodness is happiness? And how do I know that looking after these people that it's not bad? How do I know love is good? How do I know love doesn't just bring harm? Well, how do I know harm is bad? You're going to start to see this over and over and over again. And this is kind of what I'm trying to drive home. How are you even defining these terms? You go through that article, and I did skip a small paragraph there, but it literally says we've got to define it and then refuses to define it outside of this idea that Plato says it's happiness. Even this person who said, well, we equate good and goodness with obedience, then she goes on and says goodness is expressed. So she never even defines goodness. How do I know that helping somebody is good? How do I know that being loving is good and not evil? How do I know that sacrificing for somebody is good? Well, it's really going to come down to your worldview, isn't it? But if I have a nihilistic worldview, the nihilistic worldview means that nothing ultimately matters in the long scheme of things. And truthfully, an evolutionary worldview is nihilistic, whether you want to accept that or not, but ultimately it is. You think in the evolutionary worldview, what happens? We came from nothing, we return to nothing. Eventually, the universe is going to end. There is no supernatural, there is no afterlife. So it doesn't matter what I do. Whether I'm nice to people or mean to people, it's not going to matter. Whether I save 100 lives or take 100 lives, it doesn't really matter. It's a nihilistic worldview. And when you really get down to that type of worldview, then nothing matters. There is no good, there is no evil. That is exactly what Richard Dawkins said. It's just pitiless indifference. Who cares? So what difference does it make if Russia bombs Ukraine? What difference does it matter if China takes Taiwan? You say, well, that's a bad thing. Based on what? What is your rationale for it? Why is it a bad thing if somebody who carries a virus like COVID goes into a nursing home where people are very much immunocompromised, gives it to everybody, and everybody dies? Why is that a bad thing? You may be going, but I know it's bad. How? Because I could argue from an evolutionary standpoint, COVID's a good thing. And you go, how could that be? Well, in evolutionary worldview, what's the purpose in life? Well, ultimately there is no purpose because everything's going to end. It's nihilistic, but until that point happens, it's to pass on the genetic code for the strongest and the most viable to pass on the genetic code so the species can continue to grow and change and become, well, evolutionary terms, better. So therefore, when it comes to the senior population who is past contributing to society, they're past childbearing years, they've got nothing really to pass on. And even if their knowledge they may have some knowledge, but if the knowledge has been passed on, then why is it a bad thing if COVID goes in and alleviates the burden on society of taking care of them? Wouldn't it be more evolutionary beneficiary to have everybody simply executed by the time they reach the age of 60? You say, well, that's cold. That's hard. Why is it bad? Why is it bad? That's something you've got to answer. That's something you've got to. I'm going to give the answer that I go with. The answer that I hold is absolutely true. But let's go through this article a little bit more. Because they do answer some things here. So Ms. Sethi shared the insights of a variety of people who think a lot about what it means to be good. It says, here are 4 of their suggestions. What if it means to be good? Be kind. Be kind. Harriet Lesner, who's a psychologist and author. Kindness is at the center of what it means to be good. Why? Why is it? It may require very little from us or the opposite. It may require words and actions or restraints and silence. Everything that can be said with kindness. Every tough position we have to take can be taken with kindness. He says no exceptions. No exceptions. Being a good person requires that we work towards the unrealized world where the dignity and integrity of all human beings, all life, are honored and respected. Let me ask you a question again. Why is that a good thing? Why would a world where where the dignity and integrity of all human beings and all life are honored and respected? Let's take a topic again, the topic of the day, Roe v. Wade, the idea of abortion. Notice that it says the dignity, integrity of all human beings, and this is all life. All life. And as I said in the past, even a successful abortion is the termination of a life. How is that a good thing? Why is it in the Netherlands that they've wiped out pretty much Down syndrome? They don't have respect for Down syndrome children. But I'll tell you this from my experience, Down syndrome children are some of the most loving, caring, passionate, and expressive people I've ever met. But how do they get rid of it? Well, they do a test while in the womb, and they say, oh, there's a good chance that your child's going to be born with Down syndrome. And so they say we should terminate this. We should terminate this pregnancy. We should terminate that life. How is that kindness then? So you're trying to redefine kindness then. You say, well, their life would be a life of suffering. Well, would it? How are you defining on that? You see, so be kind is goodness without any definition of what goodness is. Why a good person requires that you work towards the unrealized world. What unrealized world? In the end, isn't the world just going to end? Who cares? Who cares? So maybe that doesn't really work. Got a bit of a hiccups today. Pay attention. Brother Chan Pham Dung, senior monk, Plum Village, says, in the Buddhist tradition, okay, so it's going to a foundation of Buddhism. Okay? The training starts with learning how to stop and come back to the present moment and enjoy our breathing. We stop to recognize what is happening within us and around us. Our feelings, our thinkings, whether our body is relaxed or in tension, who is there in front of us or what we are doing. With repetition, we begin to see and understand ourselves better, and choose to do one thing rather than the other. Now, paying attention, that is in Buddhism. You can find this, it's called like a contemplative walk, where you contemplate absolutely every step. And I think it can take like an hour or so, or a whole morning to walk across a garden. And the idea is that you become aware of everything. You become aware of your breathing. You become aware of the grass, where are the birds, where are the trees, where are the breeze, the sunshine, the clouds. And then it says, and with repetition, we begin to see and understand ourselves better and to choose to do one thing or the other. But my question again will rise. What makes the choice between one or the other better? What makes one good? Let's take just the idea of food. So we have before us two foods. We have a nice, beautiful, hamburger. It's flavorful. It's got all the toppings we want. It's grilled to the perfect temperature, and the bun is just perfect, it's succulent, and it's delicious. And then on the other side, we've got a nice garden salad, and we've got to decide. We can only eat one. We're going to decide, what are we going to eat? Well, what makes one better than the other? You could simply say, based on my appetite, right then, what do I actually want? For the vegetarian, they're going to make the salads better. For someone who's a straight-up carnivore, they'd say the burger's better. Someone who's omnivorous, like, truthfully, every person, how do you determine which choice is better? Then you can start going, well, the hamburger, it's red meat, it can cause clogging arteries, that kind of thing. And if you want to live a long life, well, you'd go with the salad. Who says living a long life is better? Who says that's good? You start to see the issue here? You begin to see it? How do you know what's better? How do you know what's good? So what if I can recognize myself? So what if I can recognize why I want to make one decision or the other? What determines whether it's good or not? Let's go to the third one. There's only 4 of these before I get into building a foundation. It says, ask hard questions. The Reverend William J. Barber II, civil rights activist. Says, as a public theologian, I tend to look at what has lifted us when we found ourselves at our lowest. What has called us to a better place. How are we, as a nation and as a people, using life itself to create good for the poor and broken and captive, and for those who are made to feel unacceptable? Look, he uses the word again, good. To create good. What is good? See the problem? If I'm going to say I'm a good person, how am I defining good? Is it happiness like Plato? Is it obedience like that psychologist tried to get away from? Is it just doing things that we classify as good, or is there something else? Continues paragraph. We must constantly raise the questions as we live life. Seek to answer it not only individually but together. We need to embrace those deepest moral values. Based on what? Moral values based on what? It says that call us to first and foremost seek love, truth, justice, and concern for others. But it says moral values. What moral value? What's determining the moral value? What determines in us what is right and what is wrong? So I agree. Ask hard questions. But why is it classified a good thing to uplift the poor? Why is it a good thing to set a captive free? Who's defining that it is good? And then hold yourselves accountable. Hold yourselves accountable. Rachana Kemteker, sorry if I got your name wrong, professor of philosophy, Cornell University. You have to know what your different motivations are. Know how strong they are, and if you can get some of them to pull against the others. But again, already there, it's the definite. You're assuming the definition that I know what's better and what's not. Maybe just because I have a strong motivation to go one way doesn't mean it's good. Or maybe it is good. And then she uses an example from her own life. I was a smoker in my 20s and 30s. Like many smokers, I resolved to quit on multiple occasions. When I was 40, I told my son and his buddies that I had been a smoker and had quit. I knew if I ever smoked again, I was going to have to tell them. My aversion to these kids thinking of me as a smoker swamped my desire to smoke. When I added to my rational resolution this prospect of something like shame, that I was going to have to face these kids and say, I'm a smoker, it changed. It changed. So what was her motivation? Really, it's shame. But even shame has to understand that the idea of shame is still founded in the idea of good and evil. It is. It is in good and evil. So why was she ashamed to be smoking? Well, obviously she deemed smoking bad. But why? You see, now you may be getting tired of me asking that question, but why? But it's really this definition. If we're going to define ourselves as a good person or a bad person, we have to define the terms good and bad. We have to define evil. We have to define good. And then the question is also, if after we've even defined what is good and what is bad, we have to ask the question, why is that important? Why is that important? This is all found in the foundation of our life. It really is. And you get different people who say, well, the definition of morality is to do pleasure and for myself and seek no harm in others. But again, to what end? Why is that important? Why is it important for me not to harm somebody else? Because obviously you say, well, there's times when it is good. What about in war? When you have to stop an enemy? You say, well, that's to save someone else. So why is it good there and not in others? You see, you have to answer this question first. Am I a good person? So you have to define good and evil. And then you got to say, why is it evil? Why is it important even to do this? Why is it important? And if your answer is simply just to propagate the species, in the end, that's not really going to matter, is it? Because eventually everybody's going to die, whether it be 10 years, 100 years, 10,000, 10 billion years, doesn't really matter. Everybody's going to die because the universe is going to collapse or expand on itself, depending on which theory you want to go to there. They don't even know. Is it just going to drift apart, or is it all going to slam in on of itself? And this is if you have the evolutionary worldview. So what's the matter in it? What's it going to matter in the end? But now, allow me some time here to go the opposite way. And I want to turn to the scriptures. Because obviously, when I talk about foundation, I believe that the absolute best foundation for any person is found in Jesus and the scriptures. And you may be going and saying, well, I don't believe the scriptures. I would love for you to write to me and tell me why, and have a conversation, and we can talk about these things. Now, just please don't ever be one of those ones that said Jesus never existed, because I'm going to be honest, that's going to show ignorance more than anything else. There's enough historical records that a man named Jesus of Nazareth actually existed. There's historical records that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Even when you want to take out Tertullian's statement, say, well, part of that was an addition. There are other Roman historians who are complete atheistic and rejected of it, and like Tacitus is another one, a historian who makes mention of followers of the way, this followers of Jesus, that kind of thing. They do make mention of Jesus, so Jesus did exist, and the influence of the world is there. So don't ever say that Jesus didn't exist. Now, you can disagree with anything that's, you can try to disagree and disregard anything that's idea of supernatural and other things, but don't try to come and say Jesus never existed, because Jesus actually existed, and there's historical evidence for that. So I'm going to turn there. I want to turn to the scriptures right now. I want to turn to the Bible, because it's an interesting setup. A rich young man comes to Jesus, and he asks him a question. And it really is that question of, Not just is he good, we're going to answer the question, why is it important? Why should I even define good and evil? Why should I even care if I'm a good person? Why should I care if I'm classified as a good person, that I see myself as? Why should I? This is going to be answered here in the first thing. It's going to answer really kind of in the first, his question and Jesus' first reply is where it's going to show up. It's going to answer, why do I care about being good, and how do I define good? So I'm going to go to Luke's gospel. Now, Luke is actually a grade A historian. Even when people try to say that Luke wasn't, Luke actually wrote in things that we discovered much, much later were historically accurate. So Luke's recording this event after he's researched it. And Luke 18. Now, for those unfamiliar with the Bible, the original Bible did not have chapters and verses. So if you were somehow to get a copy of the absolute earliest scriptures, there wouldn't be chapters. There would be Luke. There'd be like titles on them. So like take, for example, our book Genesis, the first book of the Bible. You wouldn't find it written in Genesis 1:1, Genesis 2:1, that kind of thing. What if you were able to get a hold of it, you would find a papyrus or a scroll rolled up, and on the outside would be written the word in Hebrew, Bereshit, which basically is just the first couple of words. Bereshit bara Elohim hashamayim v'ha'eretz. Bereshit just means in the beginning, so it's the first words of the first verse. And so Luke 18 is just helps us find it. So it's the account of the rich young ruler. So the rich young ruler, this would be a man who lives in Israel society, lives in the Jewish society, and he's coming to Jesus because he knows something's different about Jesus, and he asks him a question. Now, we don't know the man's name, but it says, now a certain ruler asked him, saying, this is asking of Jesus, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? So the man comes, and one of the first questions we're answering is, why do I even want to be good? Why do I want to be good? You see, unlike the nihilistic worldview, the theistic worldview, and in the biblical worldview, holds that there is something after life. That when life is over, something happens. Now, it's funny because only in the atheistic worldview does nothing happen. Even in the Buddhist worldview, now this is going to be kind of strange because technically a Buddhist worldview is atheistic to an extent. Even in a Buddhist worldview, it's you want to be good so you can progress through the reincarnations. Hinduism's the same. Islam, you want to try to be good. Why? Because you want Allah to have mercy on you. In Judaism, you want to be good because you want to enter into God's kingdom. In the Christian faith, we want, in essence, to be good because we want to see the eternal kingdom, which we call heaven. And so this rich young ruler comes and says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit life? So he's asking, what good do I have to do? What good do I have to do? How good do I have to be? See, as much as we try to get away from it, when we're faced with the reality of death, even if we try not to think about it, when we're faced with the reality of death, we're faced with the question, what happens next? What happens next? That's really what happens. We're faced with that question. And you need to answer that question. We can try to say nothing happens. But in all honesty, when we're faced with it, we're not convinced of that. We're like, there's got to be something more. We're like, there's something more. And this is why we ask the question, why is it important to be good? Why is it important to be good? And in the end, I'm going to flip that on its head. But that's really what it comes down to. Because the scriptures ultimately teach in Hebrews, it's appointed man once to die, then comes judgment. And so if there's that judgment, we're like, okay, as long as my good outweighs my bad, so then we got to define what is good. Well, how do we know something's good? How do I know helping the poor is the right action and not being greedy? Well, here's Jesus' answer to that question. And it's kind of a funny question. So he says, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? So Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? There's no one good. There's no one is good but one, that is God. Now, you may go, Jesus just said he wasn't God. He says, why are you calling me good? That's not actually what he's saying here. He's coming back to the man's statement, good teacher. And it's really answering the question, what is good? What is good? That's the question. Because he calls Jesus a good teacher, and Jesus is like, well, why are you calling me good? You basically just think of me as a teacher. How do you determine what is good? How do you determine what is right? What did Jesus do? Jesus ultimately made the statement that there is one who is good. There is one who sets the parameters of good and evil. There is one who sets, this is what is right, this is what is wrong. And just so those are familiar, looking after the poor is good. Looking after true injustices is good. Those are good things to do. Why? Why is it good to look after the poor? Why? Because they have intrinsic value, because they're made in the image of God, the Creator. And therefore, we look after it. Why is looking after the environment good? Why? Because it was made by God, given to us to take care of. And how we take care of it is a reflection on what we deal with, on how we relate to the Creator. And so Jesus is pointing, he's like, there is one who is the absolute standard of good. There's one who's the absolute standard of good and evil. He says there is. This is what he's referring to. And Jesus is there in this classification saying, man, you don't even understand what you're asking. He says, you're coming to me and you call me good teacher. And Jesus says, you don't even know the half of it. He's saying, almost what Jesus says, you are right in coming to me, but you don't even know why you're coming. He's saying there's no one good who's but God, but he's asking Jesus to define good. So in other words, the man without knowing it is expressing the divinity of Jesus. That's what he's doing. And so the guy is saying, well, no. You may go this way. No. Jesus never claimed to be God. There is another occasion where Jesus does something that's very, very peculiar. And it's recorded with the man who was lowered down through the roof by his friends. Jesus was teaching in a house and they couldn't get in, so they carry him up to the roof, which you could do. And because of the construction of the house, they pull apart enough space and they lower him down. And Jesus sees their faith, looks at the man and says, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees and the religious people look at Jesus and start talking. He's like, this man blasphemes. No one can forgive sins but God and God alone. And Jesus then says, it's like, which is easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or to take up your mat and walk? And then Jesus looked at him and he says, just so you know that the Son of Man has the ability to forgive sins, he turns back to him and says, take up your mat and walk. Do you understand what Jesus did there? Because they were right in saying nobody can forgive sins but God alone. And then Jesus just proved he was God. This man came and asked Jesus, are you a good teacher? And Jesus says, why are you calling me good? He says, you don't even understand what you're asking. So a lot of times we're trying to define what is good without a divine lawgiver, is the best way to put it, who defines the absolute standard of right and wrong. That's the issue. Because without that standard, then anybody can be classified as good based on a subjective idea. And like I said, you may try to say, well, as long as I don't hurt people, that's good. Well, who says that's good not to hurt people? Kind of thing. I remember the movie Demolition Man, where Stallone's character goes, hurting people isn't good. Then he goes, well, some of the time it is. Well, how do you define that? How is it subjective? It can't be. We say no, it's good. But we have to have the divine law. So what Jesus did is he points out there is one who sets what is right and wrong. And now Jesus turns and he gives some things here. He says, you know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, honor your father and mother. These are obedience acts, are they not? And so we may try to define ourselves as the same way this man is. And try to define ourselves, but you know what? I do good. I don't steal. I don't bear false witness. I try not to lie. I haven't killed anybody. I do my best to honor my parents. So I try to do good to others. I may not be perfect, but I do good. So yeah, I'm going to classify myself as good. But when we stop and we really look into it, we're going to end up like this young man, this rich ruler. And it says, all these things I've kept from my youth. And another spot where it was recorded, they record him saying, what still do I lack? In other words, he says, I'm missing something. He says, I kept all these things from my youth. But then why did he come to ask Jesus? Because he knows something's missing. And so when Jesus heard these things, he said to him, he says, you still lack something. Sell all that you have and distribute it to the poor, and you'll have treasures in heaven, and come follow me. It says when he heard this, he became very sorrowful, for he was rich. And he actually leaves. And he leaves. So I'm going to partly agree with that psychologist. It's not really about obedience per se. You see, when we start to look at it, and we begin to understand that God is righteous, that God is the one who sets the absolute standard, then we have to start looking at things. You see, we have to start going by what he says is good. And when it comes down to it, we'll find out that, you know what, we're not good. So we say, wait a minute, I still classify as good. I haven't done these things. Well, let's talk about theft. Have we ever downloaded music? Have we ever downloaded a movie? Have we ever taken anything, no matter how small, that doesn't belong to us? Did we ever steal a cookie that our parents say we can't have right now, and we took it anyway? Then we're a thief. Have we ever lied? Even maybe with good intentions. Maybe a little white lie. Maybe we've lied by omission. Then that makes us a liar. Have we ever lusted after somebody? Then the sin is still in the heart. And then even by our own definitions, we fall short. Now, you say, well, yeah, but it's not that bad. I do a lot of good, so what if I mess up every now and then? Well, let's put this in a human perspective, and I often use this one, and youth understand this quite well after it's explained. I said, let's suppose I'm a doctor, and I'm a great doctor. I'm an amazing doctor, and in my practice, I've saved 100 people's lives who would have died. They would have been dead if I was not there, and I saved them. And then one day, I go home, and I find my wife having an affair, and in a fit of rage, I kill my wife, and I kill her lover. Do I deserve to go to jail? And the answer, if we look at it, is yes, we do. They would deserve to go to jail if they did that. And I can go, wait a minute though. They saved 100 people's lives who would have been dead if they weren't there, and they killed 2, so they still have 99 others that would balance it out, would it not? And you go, no. Instead, in human life, it's like it doesn't work that way. And the same is true when it comes to the divine, to God. And we go, wait a minute, it's like, hold on, this can't be right. It's answering the question, why do we want to be good? Because there's a judgment. But if I'm already guilty because I'm already past the point where I've broken the rules, what can I do about this? Do I just continue to do good? Well, it's not going to matter. It wouldn't matter if that doctor went out and saved another 100 people. He still murdered 2. He'd still go to jail. He loses practice and deserve the punishment. And so, how then can we have eternal life? Well, this is why Jesus is important. The Bible makes it clear that the reason Jesus went to the cross, because the punishment for our sin in this case is death in God's divine law. It's death. And yet, it says Jesus, in essence, he became sin. He became the very nature of sin for us. And so it says he will wipe it away. Now, you may struggle with that, and that's what we call the scandal of grace. It's like, well, you're telling me no matter what somebody's done, they can be forgiven? Well, that's only because we keep this standard of big rights and big wrongs. In God's eyes, you still broke the law. It didn't matter if you stole, didn't matter if you murdered, it doesn't matter, you'd still go to jail. You're still a lawbreaker. And so that last part that he was telling us, like, what is the thing that we are to do? Follow Jesus. So let me ask you that question that I started with. Are you a good person? Are we a good person? And you've got to start by defining some words first. You've got to go back to your foundation. And you've got to start to define what is good, what is bad. And you got to ask, why does that even matter? And that's where you begin with your foundation. So I agree with that gentleman, asking the hard questions. And that is one of the hard questions, because it may mean looking back and admitting things we don't want to admit, facing things we don't want to admit. And in the end, we'll become better people. But we have to follow Jesus. That is where we've got to go. All right, I'm going to come to a stop there. We'll close our show there today. If you have any questions or anything you want to talk about, I encourage you to write to me, pastorstephenteed@gmail.com. Send me a message, call me if you've got my number. I'd love to talk to you. But until next time, build your life on the foundation of Jesus. Stop and look and answer those questions. Why does life matter? Where do I come from? What is my value? What happens when I die? And you will find that all the satisfactory answers are found in Jesus. So until next time, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face shine upon you and give you His peace. And may you grow in the knowledge of Him.